Welcome, everyone. It's really great to have you here. We're going to explore the very interesting question of publicity in your own career, specifically publicity for writers in general, which is something that my committee is very interested in doing, and we have a fantastic panel to do it. Can you tell us what an announcement is? What's the criteria for running it? What kinds of things are helpful, and what placement is when it comes to an announcement?
And when you say interesting announcement in a story, you're talking about a story, it's like what Jay does, like more of a narrative in terms
Correct.
of, okay. Announcements are the bread and butter for variety. In terms of, on the one hand, it's abundantly easy for you guys to get publicity if you have something to say. If you have sold a script, if you sold it to a studio, if you sold it to a production company, you actually have a tremendous amount of power in terms of being, if you know anybody at the paper, or if you don't know anybody, if you just can do some reading and look at the paper and say, this reporter seems to write stories that look sort of like what I'd like mine to be like. It looks like he covers the same area. You just call. But the trick is you actually have to have something to say, because we will know if you don't. I mean, and in terms of what it takes for that to be, you have to have sold it to somebody. You have to sold it to somebody for money, not because we want to announce, not even because we want to announce the amount of money. I mean, if it's a huge deal, I mean that's great, but that's not the point. It's just it has to be. It can't be like your buddy saying, "Hey, would you play producer for me on this?" We can figure that much out. And if you have just a sale that's been done, or an option that's been taken and it's with a legitimate producer, that's a story. And you have the potential to control that story if you call us first, because that's the kind of the law of the land, is however we got the story. If I sniff out the story and that a deal's been done, I mean Chris can certainly vouch for this, if I sniff out the story that deal's been done, it's my call to decide if I'm going to run the story or not. I mean, it's my call to say, he may or may not be ready for that story to run because there's deal points that are open, what have you, and it'll be my choice to do it. And I'll either, there's been times I've held on stories because of deal points, and there's times when I've said, I'm sorry, I'm running it anyway. By the same token, if you guys call the story, there's a control that you have because you brought it to us. And that means that there is a certain amount of, we'll do our own research, but it's like because it came through you, you are the prism through which we will see the story. You are the ones that got there first. And I'm always surprised that writers don't take more advantage of that. I mean, I think they just think like it's some amazing thing to call a writer, which it's so, we're a bunch of schmucks in cubicles. I mean, it's not that hard. And again, but at the same time, there's nothing more annoying than somebody who calls and they really don't have anything to say. They just want the ink, and it's like, if you don't have the story, please use your time for writing your script and selling it, and please don't call us.
So you're recommending them calling the reporter specifically, not just the switchboard, like find someone.
No, absolutely. If you because it's like trying to just call the switchboard, that's crazy. I mean, that's actually an excellent filtering system to make sure we don't get the lunatics. I mean, it's just, which we've gotten more than a few of in our time as well. But no, you should do your homework, and we respect that. We respect writers who can figure it out. And you guys are smart people. There's no reason you shouldn't be able to read the paper, look at who does the kind of stories. I mean, they're divided by beats. A reporter has a given beat. One person covers Newline, another person covers Fox. If you've sold a script to a Fox-based producer, you look for who does the Fox-based stories. If you sold to an indie producer, you look for who does the indie stories. And making that phone call, we love writers. We love the fact when writers do good. We want to be able to put it out there. But a lot of times, it's that's not the people who put out the stories. A lot of times, it's because it's a star-based project, and it's like so often stories are shaped by how they got to us.
And we'll get to that via Chris Day in a second, but I want to go first to Jay Fernandez. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about what the genesis of your column, Scriptland, is quickly, and then tell us what constitutes the bigger story for you, what constitutes a feature story for you, and tell us, when you talk about your column, tell us a little bit about what you're looking for in a story for your column.
I've been trying to come up with an answer for that all week, and it's sort of like the the Chief Justice definition of pornography. I can't tell you what it is, but I know it when I see it. And I was in a meeting with an agency yesterday, and they asked me the same thing, and I said, I gave them the broad strokes. You know, it's the Scriptland is meant to cover the industry from the screenwriting perspective, but that's a really big canvas, and there's all kinds of individuals and individual development stories and individual scripts that are really interesting. But they went around and pitched things, and I knew the 3 things that were stories because they had a hook that you all know. I mean, you all read the trades, and you all read the LA Times every day, right? Yes, or you will starting tomorrow. And you know which ones you skip over and which ones you dig into. And maybe you couldn't tell me now why, but you know when you're reading it, you know what the hook is. There's something interesting about that person or their backstory or how they got in the door. Or, you know, all those things are interesting to me. I'll happily talk to the lunatics. I'll happily take the news calls. I'll happily bite into Variety's announcement coverage. You really do have to you have to do it yourself, and it's interesting to me because you all presumably are working on how to pitch really well, right? No? You should be, but it's actually kind of a similar thing that goes for pitching yourself to journalists. I mean, journalists, especially at the Times right now, it's shrinking. So the people that are doing the stories are doing more and more stories, and they don't have a lot of time to read a long email. So you need that two graph pitch that's either going to hook them or it's not, because they're going through a lot of them. So kind of honing that and, not burying the lead of, oh, and by the way, this is a true story about my grandfather who caught the Boston Strangler. Put that in the subject line, and that'll get somebody's attention. I mean, I've followed stories that were pitched to me by writers, by publicists, stuff that I found out just going on lunches with screenwriters. Unless you're like of Andrea and John status and doing those kind of huge stories, and if you are, by the way, you better make sure that you get in on every production story that any major publication is doing, because lots of times the writer will the studio won't say, oh hey, the writer's available. No one knows, nobody's pitching you in that way. You should be part of every one of those stories for the very reason that John said, is that you know more about the story than anybody else. Unfortunately, the way the system has been kind of shifted, you're not the face of the movie because you're not a movie star, and you're not the director, and you're most of the times not even involved with production. So you've got to put yourself out there and make sure you get involved in those stories.
We'll talk about that, how to push yourself through that system in a little bit, but